All right, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce Alex Diraviam. He's a brilliant engineer, a great friend of mine, and the CEO of MOCBoxing. So, Alex, how you doing today, man?
I'm great, Ishan, and thanks for having me on here. Really
Absolutely,
excited.
it's a pleasure, man. And so let's just dive right in. Alex, tell us a little bit more about your story.
So the story I want to talk to you guys about today is my engineering story, which has been kind of all over the place, but it's kind of your typical one, starts with building Legos as a kid and then turns into trying to design a whole bunch of things, most of them not working, trying a bunch of different fields, stumbling through college, and eventually starting two companies, which is to where I am now, where I've just launched my second one. And yeah, I mean, it's chaos from start to finish, but it's like a labor of love. So everything I've done is just like I I kind of always built with this idea in mind of I want to build the kinds of things that I would want to use and then see if I can make them available to other people. Um, so when I was a young kid, it was like I just wanted to be an inventor. And then I was kind of told, that's not a real job. Um, Lo and behold, it actually is. It's just it takes you a while to figure out that for yourself. So I got like really interested in the sciences, especially like astronomy and physics, and then and architecture. And so I started building more, and this is my Lego room. It's kind of a display item of the stuff that I've been working on for years and years. And there's a city over there I've been working on for like almost 15 years now. And so, every step of the way, it's just been trial and experimentation. I built like mechanical contraptions. I tried to like make like drawbridges and turntables and stuff that were mechanically motivated. And then from there, it sort of turned into, okay, well, turns out you need to learn how to code to make some of these contraptions work. So I learned coding, um, and then wound up building some like prototypes for a factory that I worked at. And it just sort of spiraled out of control until we are here now, where I initially launched a 3D printing company and then realized it sort of needed some adjustments and it was really expensive to run. And I was like, it's cheaper than building a mechanical company, building something with no physical products in my house. And so I landed on the software company that I run today.
That's awesome. So let's just dive into the business side. I mean, what
Absolutely.
inspired you to start that business? I mean, I know, I've known you since middle school. I mean, I remember how you were creative and so forth back then. So it's just so awesome to see, where you are now in regards to that. So, what inspired you to start that business?
Yeah. I think part of it was realizing that I really, really don't want to work a 9 to 5 because my experience with 9 to 5s has been like stifled creativity, like to put it shortly, right? Like you propose plans, but the company is sort of like, we have a trajectory. And at times, like someone who's like really creative winds up being just a bad employee for a company whose goal is to just get something out the door that has a process. Um, but I started to realize that in college, I was like, I need more creative outlets and I'm just not getting enough. And that's kind of why I started. So I don't know, a lot of the time I would say the ideas because like I've literally got like well over 1,000 ideas just like documented throughout the margins of books throughout like literally some are like detailed on napkins. And like that is the kind of like ideation I do all the time. It's written on everything. There's sticky notes everywhere and I love it. Um so part of the issue really was deciding which thing to do. Um so I guess back freshman year of college, I would organize some of my friends to like we would just book a room in the library and we'd sit down and we'd brainstorm on the board and then we'd like do PowerPoint presentations, just like try to get the ideas churning. Um, and I've had to shut down some of those projects because like some of the people I've worked with, I'm like, you might be good at this technologically, but we're not able to see eye to eye on how we're going to build this. And it's been a lot of expansion contractions, some business competitions. Um, and each step of the way, I would say I got like a little bit closer to finding out exactly what it was I wanted to do. And even then, like the whole time, I've kind of had this idea in mind, um, of like my end goal is to run a company that can just turn my ideas into products. So the question was finding what's the best first step, and that's where there's been a lot of experimentation. So yeah, I guess the short summary was like it started with like I wanted to build this thing to make a factory like more efficient. It was like sort of like a do all joint, because robots have this issue where like you need a custom motor for each part of the arm. But if you have the same joint in each place, it's much easier to replace because you just have to buy one part and you can put it anywhere. Then I worked in Germany as a linguist, and it was like, okay, I really love linguistics, so this is like that much closer. And with each project, I was like more and more excited to work on this every day, to lose a lot of sleep for it, to like literally like I would be on my way to bed. My roommate would say something about like something that happened to an investor or like something that happened to Mattel when they were going out of business for the however many at the time.
Right.
And then it would just be like, okay, well, there goes sleep tonight, and we painted one of the walls of our apartment with whiteboard paint, and we would just go and like do schematics on there. He'd like sit in his room, he'd do diagrams, I would do code, and then we'd meet up every couple hours and
Oh
like
wow.
cross-examine them. Yeah, so I'm not going to telling a story start to finish, but that's kind of the way this whole process has been. It's just like stumbling on things, be like, oh, I really, really like this. I really love linguistics. I really love like Legos, honestly. And it's like, then it was like, well, what are the things that I can do nonstop? Because I have had like I've had some semesters where like we wrote a 500-page paper, and that was insane in and of itself. But it was like I was working on the designs for that paper 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I was going insane. And I was like, maybe this isn't exactly it. But coding is something that like I have pulled all-nighters for that no one asked me to. I've learned languages that no one asked me to. It was like, okay, I feel like I'm pretty motivated here. Then it was like, okay, mix language um or sorry, mix coding with Legos, perfect. And then sort of the icing on top was like I stumbled into this market. I'd always liked Legos, but I didn't know exactly what to do with that fact. And so yeah, and so the thing is like a lot of what had happened was me building automation software. Like I designed a toothbrush holder for my 3D printing company. I was like, I'm just gonna make little household items that are 3D printed. And while I was going, I was like, wow, how are other people doing this? Because it's so labor intensive. And then I was like, okay, let me automate my whole process. So I wrote software, I got additions for my 3D printer, and then I could run them from my phone. And I had code that just like whenever an order would come in, the code would just read the order, send it to the printer, and I started designing like machines to automatically box them as well. And that was super fun. And I think there's a good market for it. The issue was it's really expensive to get all that tech like nice looking. So in the end, I wound up what do you call it? In the end, I took that core feature, this automation, and I was like, okay, I've got this, and I have Legos. Where can I mix those? And then it was like you know, I sort of just kept delving deeper and deeper, talking to more people, and figuring out what they actually want. And that's sort of how I wound up with this final decision. It's like I basically run a Lego logistics software company now, and that's those are like the three paths that had to intertwine for me to get.
Right, right. And you know, you speak about you know, sort of the trial and errors and so forth. So what were some of the challenging moments, you know, starting a business, and you know, what did you end up doing differently that changed the outcome?
Yeah. Oh God, so many things. I'll talk about this one in particular because I guess maybe it's the most clean cut. But I will preface with this that like there has been no part of the entrepreneurship process that has worked out the way I planned. I kid you not. Like I have well over 1,000 pages documenting the process. I'm probably 2 to 3,000 because I have 600 pages just from interviewing people. So it's just like every part of that process was like I'm just gonna start something, see where it goes, then edit the plan, and then see where it goes, then edit the plan. Um, and so I guess yeah, the two main points to talk about there are like the way the interviews sort of went, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. The other side is how the actual design changed over time. So with interviewing, it was like I set out just a few questions, and I was like, I'm going to find people to ask these to, and then I'd get through the questions, and some of the people would literally tell me like, "You are asking the wrong person these questions." I'm like, okay, A, you're very right. I need to find new people to talk to. And B, I need to change my questions. And so after I finished interviewing like roughly 130 people, I had gone through 9 full iterations of this questionnaire. Some of them had 80 questions on them. Like it
Wow.
went through like this massive overhaul. But it was like I had to keep learning because I didn't even know what questions to ask until I got deep enough into it to like understand the nuances of the field. And then when it came to the actual product design, my initial idea was like, I think I was going to make a software that turned your pictures into like a Lego instruction manual where you could like build that picture out of, just parts. Um, and I still want to do that, but I realized that wasn't what people were really after. I'd say the biggest hole in the market that I'm serving is convenience. It is just very difficult to find sellers you trust to like narrow it down to check out in anything less than 10 minutes. And for a lot of people, it takes like 2 to 3 weeks to put a full shopping cart together of all the pieces you need. I was like, I'm taking that out of people's hands. So they just tell me what they want and I will take care of the rest. Um, and it took a lot of trial and error to land on that because first it was like, okay, well, what do I sell? Do I sell custom sets? Do I sell retired sets? Who's going to supply the retired sets? Who's going to supply the custom sets? And then the answers I thought I had to those questions, like, oh, I'll just look for who's already selling online and like put them into my system. And then it was like, well, no, you kind of have to need to like negotiate with them more. Um, and that's sort of the thing was like I guess at every step of the way, the trial was building and the error was not having talked to enough people about what they wanted me to build before I built it.
Right. And I mean, does that kind of tie into like the sales engine and so forth, like the selling part of it, or was that pretty because I know like for any business starting out, it's always, there's so much selling and stuff involved in marketing and that sort of thing. And obviously that's what, for entrepreneurs, that's a really critical arm for, any business starting out because, you can have a great product, but if you're not out there selling and so forth, it's hard to get it off the ground, right?
Yeah. And I don't know, I've had to like learn how to tone it down a little bit when it comes to selling because I used to work at the Lego store. So I had sort of that experience of like, I need to learn how to sell. And that was in the middle of COVID. So I just sort of like threw myself in. I was like, this is a skill I'm missing and I've got to figure it out. Um, So then when it came to this, I was like, okay, I really want to start selling this, but I don't even have the thing finished being built yet. And so I sort of had that reverse problem where like when I built the linguistics software in Germany, I was like, awesome, I finished this. There's one university that like requested me to build it, so they're using it. But then I was like, I wanted to go pitch it to my own university, and they were like, oh, this is cool. You should write a paper on it or something. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this information. Um, but I don't know, like from there, it was sort of like, okay, that's an example of how not to sell. Then I needed to go acquire the skills to learn how to sell. And I've worked a couple of sales positions since. Then it was the other side of like, okay, like there was a study software that I built at a competition, and we had like the theoretical groundwork laid out for it. And then it was just like, okay, let's go into the community and like find someone to use it. Like no one wants to use a thing that doesn't exist. So you always have to like toe the line. And that was a particular issue here was like not being confident enough that the product was a high enough quality to like get people to use it. But at the same time, realizing that if you spend too much time on the quality, you're gonna needlessly like spin your wheels fixing errors that other people don't care about. So you have to like get like I mean it's the concept of the minimum viable product, right? You get an idea out there that is just fleshed out enough for it to work, but not so fleshed out that you started wasting time on the details. Let your customers tell you, hey, I love this, I hate this, give me more of that, get rid of that, and then you just go from there.
Right. No, that makes sense. I mean, so even throughout your business research, where specifically did you see like opportunities in the market? Because I know you've been, through surveying customers and, doing, with engineering and so forth, testing and pivoting and so forth. But throughout the research that you've seen, like what specifically, where did you see a gap like in the market and how were you trying to fill that?
Yeah, so that there's sort of two parts of that. One is the research I did about like the concept of finding your place in the market, and the other is like actually finding that place. So I've tried to like read a lot of books on these topics. One of my favorites is like Zero to One, and I think that one's by one of the co-founders of PayPal, and he sort of talks about like here are the things that make a good company. If you're missing one of these, you will not be able to like scale up, which is like when we go from like, 1 to 10 person companies to like how do you get 100, 200, 300 employees. Um, and that I don't know, that was sort of interesting because it was like it now gave me criteria for every idea that I just happened to have while walking down the street one day. It was like put it through the test that that book and many other books gave, and it was like, does it fail the test? Yes. Okay, modify it or think of something new. Does it pass the test? Okay, let's see what we can do with this. Um, and that was really important because I would have wasted so much time building things that I just like now would think are not great ideas. And I think an example of that is in the food industry. Like one of the ideas I really wanted to implement was like Japan has pizza vending machines. Like it will make a custom pizza. And that was something I was like, oh man, we could use that in America. Like people hate waiting for the hour to 2 hour waits that you have in college towns for pizza. Like how do I how do I bring that here? And then it was like the more research I did, the more I like looked into it. It was like, okay, this is not feasible for me right now. This is an idea that is cool, but it would be hard to establish a market. I need to learn like FDA standards, figure out how that all works. So it was like throw that idea out. But on the other hand, um, that process sort of gets refined when you just ask people, like, test your ideas.
Right.
And it's a simple question of like asking them, do you actually want this thing that I'm about to spend months or years building? How much will you pay for it? Because if those numbers don't add up, it's still not worth building it, even if they want it.
Right.
Um, and that's kind of been the end thing that brought me to this product was like, yeah, some people want the mosaic, some people want the custom sets. They were not willing to change the ways that they currently shop, a lot of them, unless I made some major change. And then it was sort of like a back and forth, like, okay, I would go into interviews being like, well, what if I made this change? Would you want it that? What are good examples of things that you like? Where do you buy currently? And look at those good examples and talk to those subject area experts. I would ask people like at the end of every interview, who else should I talk to? Do you have any friends who like this? Do you know anyone who works at Lego or who works at Bricklink or any of these other companies? And gradually you get a much better idea of like what needs are already being served. Like when I talk to the heads of other companies, they're like, okay, this is our niche. And so it's a great opportunity to learn how they got to where they are, how they tested their market. And then for me to be like, okay, I have that knowledge, but I also know not to go into their market. It's already a need being filled. And so it's that gradual testing of like, will people pay for it? Once you find the yes, how much will they pay for it? What features does it need to have to pay for it? What would be upgrades that they would pay for more? Um, what you know what companies do they like but just aren't meeting all of their needs, and it just you ask questions, you sort of turn it into like this nebulous ball that collapses into like a well formulated idea, and then you ask more questions, you puncture the balloon, you like stretch it, reshape it, turn it into clay, and then make your sculpture. And it's like is this constant thing of like looking at the same data over and over again and adding sprinkle by sprinkle of more data, and then trying to find different angles to look at it from until it looks like something that resembles a real useful company.
Right. Right. No, that's perfectly said. I mean, in terms of like testing and so forth, and and also, I mean, one of the new disruptors like in the market, whether we use it as an advantage or disadvantage, I was just curious, like, what are some of the synergies between engineering and AI? Because I know, AI is just taking the chat GPT and all these different programs and stuff are making all these automations and everything much more quicker. So, what are some of the synergies that you potentially see with engineering and AI?
Um, Everything you can think of. Like if it there's two sides to that. I feel like with all these things, there's two sides, right? In this case, it's the actual process being automated and the thing creating the process can be automated. And so like the creating the process part, we can think of like generative AI. Like you want to make artwork? Okay, it's a creative process that we think of inherently, but you can still get AI to do something creative. It's just sort of like their version of creative is like they study something like we study the masters in any field, and then they're like, how can I emulate this with a slight twist? And that's where the algorithm comes in. But procedurally, you'd think of things more like factories. Like, how could I, um, you know, I want to make shoes. I don't have enough employees to make 100,000 shoes a year. But if I get the right machines in here, then maybe the people in the factories are only just stitching the top and bottom together, or maybe they're just packing the boxes, or ideally doing none of it. I say ideally from a company's perspective, but not from an employee's perspective, because we all like having jobs um, that at least pay our bills. But I would say the biggest application, um, one is well, actually two, right? One is that it's easier for small businesses to get started now because whereas you may have needed initially like to know how to edit videos, you need to like know how to make contacts, you need to know how to like design a product. Now there's software that can do every single one of those things. And at the beginning of a startup, I've been told like your goal is to become very good at one thing that you alone can provide. And everything else that you need, if it's not something unique to your value proposition, just outsource it. You can fix it later. You can make it better later, right? When Google started, it was the algorithm. And then later it was Alter Gmail. And later it was Google Hangouts. And later it was like all this startup tech. But it started with one core feature. And anything that they didn't have, they could just get from someone else. So that's the thing. Like fill the gaps with AI, and then it allows us to go back in and make more nuanced edits, right? Like I would rather have a professional video editor, but until I can afford one, I'm using AI or I'm using the basics. Um, and the biggest application I think is in meeting our basic needs. So that's like really that's food production more than anything, but it's also like fuel extraction, raw minerals like iron ore, and transportations. Like it applies to every industry, but when it comes to food specifically, like there are still food deserts in America. There are many food deserts actually just around the world. And if we can figure out how to automate farming, how to improve crop yields, how to just take the necessary labor, especially like any backbreaking labor, right? Like we have in shoe factories or we have in iron ore mines. If we can develop a process either using our own brains or AI's brains that makes that whole thing easier and then put pieces of automation in, right? Like we now have tractors that can like that can till the ground, and every year we get a bigger version of it. And eventually you might just be able to like snap your fingers and the whole ground is tilled from like a space laser. Um, and obviously that sounds a little bit sci-fi, but that is part of like the dreaming of this. Like you couldn't have imagined 50 years ago what AI can do today,
Of
and it is
course.
that imagination. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and so quickly too. I mean, it literally just popped up, and now like all these advancements and everything. I mean, I know it. I mean, you're right. It does sound sci-fi, but I mean, it's just the reality we live in now, right? So even just spiraling off of that, so what is your why? I know that's a dense question, but what is your why?
my why, I would say, like, has always sort of been there in the background. Um, and then it really matured in the middle of high school, which is make the world a better place than you found it, or leave the world a better place than you found it. And so it was like when I was young, I like really enjoyed doing volunteer projects with my church. I started like doing like some youth preaching and stuff. And while I was doing that, like it was always integrated into some sort of like volunteer project. Let's go clean up the Everglades, or let's go feed or clothe the homeless, or whatever it needs to be. Um, and then I took a trip to India in the seventh grade to visit some family, and it sort of like readjusted the way I saw homelessness and hunger because it showed me it on a much larger scale. And then in like, I guess it was like ninth grade was when I heard a teacher say that. And I was like, that's a little bit strange because she did not seem to care that much about people, but it stuck with me. Um, and that's sort of now been the driving thing. Like, and this is also why I'm a lot more comfortable jumping from product to product than I think I was 5 years ago, or than I think most people are when they're starting entrepreneurship. Because you may be in love with your product, but like the end goal of your company has to be more important than what you're doing right now. Like you can hang on to a dying ship, but if your goal is to become a successful captain, sometimes you got to let the ship sink and go to the next ship. Um, and so that's the thing. Like my end goal is like as humanitarian as I can become. Like I would really love to like improve poverty, education, and hunger, and just sort of like tackle these issues one by one throughout society. And I learned along the way that engineering provides a very unique angle to that, because whereas a lot of these social problems become issues of social interaction, engineering gives you a lens to sort of look at it and be like, how can we build a better system for this? Right? It's not just like how do we disseminate information about like the candidates that are running for president, but how do we like actually build a structure that just results in a better democracy? Where it's like we have so many close to like 50-50 elections basically since Reagan. Um, and it's like that's happened because information has just started to spread at such a rate that I think it winds up being more of a statistical toss-up than anything. But if you are able to like control the way information disseminates, as we saw kind of with Facebook and some recent elections, that like you have this ability to now change the outcome of a social event, which is like how people interact with the information, how they interact with each other. And so that gives us the tools to sort of walk forward and be like, well, how do we tell people where food is? How do we map out where these things need to like where farms should be rather than just where is it convenient to open a farm? Um, and as we sort of like analyze each pinpoint on society, it gives us this ability to like really flesh it out and develop it. And it no longer is like a random scatter plot. It's like it's intentional. And that's where I want to go. I want to take whatever product, like even if this product fails, as much as I'd like it to succeed, I'm okay with that because I've learned a lot from it. And the goal is to just build something that will last long enough that I can take the next step and the next step and the next step and eventually wind up building infrastructure or wherever I can in the world.
That's
So yeah,
awesome.
my why is help people.
No, that is awesome. And last question. So what is your advice to aspiring entrepreneurs?
Yeah. God, don't give up. I've heard be perseverant so many times, and like it's weird because like every time you hear it, it kind of means something different to you because you're in a different part of your career every time you hear it. So sometimes it's like stick out your marriage, and sometimes it's just like just finish writing the paper you have to for college. Um, and sometimes it's like go make sure you get enough sleep. Like interpreting it in the moment is a very hard thing to do to figure out where am I actually supposed to go. But yeah, I would say yeah. So stay perseverant. Like even if you try something a million times, it could work on a million and one time, but make sure that you're not wasting your time. So like try to have that back and forth with yourself. Make sure you contact experts. Like I did not know how to code. I did not know how to do any sort of marketing thing. I did not know how to like make connections. Those were all things that I found people who were good at it and I asked them, how do you do it? And then they will give you new contacts who are even better than them, right? Because for whoever is teaching you, that person was also taught by someone. If you can ride the chain of command all the way up to the top, then you get the best advice. And I think that is partnered with something else, which is don't expect fantastic results on your first try. Like when I was designing my toothbrush holder for my 3D printing company, I went through 17 designs in 2 weeks, like fully fleshed out. I tested them on people. People didn't know how to use them. They were like, I hate this. And you build it again. But when it comes to experts, you don't get access to the best expert on the first try. And even if you try to do that, you're going to make a mistake. You don't know what you need at the beginning. Like a huge part of this is just squirm and figure out what sticks to you. So, like I go and ask like a college professor, what can I do to learn marketing? And then they'll send me to someone else. And I might discover, oh, I need to also learn marketing in a store. So I'll go ask that too. But yeah, I know we're about to run out of time. So that's roughly it. Is like seek out experts, be perseverant, and keep trying new things. Even if it seems like there's no structure, structure will eventually emerge.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. This was an awesome interview. And, to anyone interested in learning more about MOCBoxing and Alex's businesses, those links will be in the comments below. You know, to anyone viewing, thank you so much for tuning in, and please subscribe for more. If you'd like to be a future guest speaker, feel free to reach out. Alex, thank you so much again, man. It was great seeing you.
Thanks. It's my pleasure.